He handed 4 elite women $1 billion each and gave them 5 days to invest it. Then, he sat back and watched what they did when they thought the world wasn't looking. 3 played the game like sharks. Hostile takeovers, luxury acquisitions, power plays that shook the stock market. But the 5th person, not a socialite or a director, but a black waitress at his private club, did something that defied every law of business he knew. Something so staggering that he sat alone in his Tokyo penthouse at 3 a.m., rewinding the transaction logs, trying to fathom where the money went. What could make a billionaire who owns the skyline stop breathing? That answer would shatter his arranged marriage, spark a corporate war that threatened his family legacy, and force him to choose between the empire he built and the one woman who saw him as more than a paycheck. Welcome back to your channel Daylight Korean Mafia. To everyone following this journey of power and redemption, thank you. If you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's dive into this billion-dollar drama. Inside a glass-walled penthouse 40 floors above Tokyo, Daiki Arashiro stands motionless before floor-to-ceiling windows. He is the definition of power, expensive tailored suit, sharp features, but eyes that look like they've seen too much of the wrong things. His phone buzzes on the marble desk. A text from Soojin Park, his fiancée. The merger documents are ready. Our wedding will be the biggest acquisition of the decade. Daiki doesn't reply. A glass of expensive whiskey sits untouched. He poured it an hour ago, but just stares at it, as if the amber liquid holds the secret to why his life feels like a hollow contract. Behind him, a trusted advisor, older, scarred by years of corporate battles, enters the room. The board is waiting, Arashiro-sama, he says softly. Daiki's voice is flat, cutting through the silence. Do you think my father ever felt like a man, or just a walking ledger? He turns slowly. I'm engaged to a woman who talks about our marriage like a hostile takeover. I feel like I'm walking toward my own execution. The advisor doesn't blink. Your father married 4 times. He died with $1 trillion and no one to hold his hand. You want something different? You need to find the truth behind the masks. The inciting incident, the eavesdropping. The next afternoon, sun filters through the high windows of the Arashiro compound. Daiki walks past the library and hears a familiar voice, Soojin. He stops, not intending to listen, but her words strike like a blade. Once the rings are on, Arashiro Industries will be under our family's thumb, she says, laughing softly to a confidant. Daiki is so blinded by his honor that he won't even see the assets being stripped. Men like him think a contract is a commitment. It's just an opening. Daiki's jaw tightens. He doesn't storm in. He simply turns and walks away, silent as a ghost, his mind already spinning with the experiment that will change everything. The 4 ladies, the setup. That evening, 4 women exist in his orbit, each a different kind of beautiful and dangerous. Soojin Park, the fiancée at an exclusive rooftop bar, her eyes glued to a tablet. She is calculating napkin colors and guest lists for the engagement party with the precision of a military strike. To her, love is a liability, only power remains. Ayaka Fujimoto, the director in the marketing war room, barking orders. She is brilliant, sharp, and views Daiki as the ultimate ladder to the top. She doesn't want his heart. She wants his seat at the head of the table. Hanae Takizawa, the rival sitting in her own office across the street, watching Daiki's building. She's known him since childhood, and her goal is simple: to beat him at his own game and prove she is the superior heir. Miyuki Shindo, the legal advisor reviewing contracts with cold, efficient eyes. She knows every loophole in Daiki's life, waiting for the right moment to make herself indispensable. The wild card, Zola Mensah. And then, there is Zola Mensah. Simple uniform, hair tied back elegantly. She is moving through the executive club, quiet as a shadow, humming a soft melody from her home in Ghana. The sound is warm, completely out of place in this cold, glass building. Daiki walks past and stops. The sound catches him. What is that song? Zola startles, looking down. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to disturb the silence. You didn't, Daiki says, his voice softer than he intends. What is it? It is a song about the harvest, she says, meeting his eyes for a brief, brave second. About planting seeds you will never see grow, so the next generation can eat. Their gazes hold. For the first time in years, Daiki feels something shift in his chest. Keep humming. he says before walking away. That night, in his study, Daiki looks at 5 black cards on his desk. 4 were meant for the elite. The 5th? He slides it into a plain envelope. Let's see, he whispers to the empty room. Who is actually worth the investment? The soft blue light from the computer screen was the only thing cutting through the darkness of Daiki's office. It was exactly 3 a.m. In the silence of the high-rise building, a sharp ping echoed against the glass walls. Daiki leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. A red alert flashed on his private banking monitor. One of the black cards had just hit its maximum limit. $1 billion was gone in a single transaction. He expected this from Soojin. He thought he would see a charge for a private jet, a diamond mine, or a high-end fashion house in Paris. But as he clicked the alert to see the location of the sale, his heart skipped a beat. The money hadn't been spent at a luxury boutique or a corporate auction. The GPS tracker placed the transaction at a small, rundown community center on the edge of the city. A community center? Daiki whispered to the empty room. He rubbed his face, trying to make sense of the data. Billionaires did not shop at community centers. Sharks did not spend their fortunes in places with peeling paint and plastic chairs. He pulled up the live security feed linked to the card's location. On the screen, the grainy black and white footage showed a side door opening. A woman stepped out into the rainy night. She wasn't carrying shopping bags or wearing furs. She was wearing a thin, cheap coat over a server's uniform. It was Zola. She stood under a flickering street lamp, looking at a piece of paper in her hand. She looked tired, but there was a strange peace on her face. A moment later, an elderly man walked up to her. He looked like he had lost everything. Daiki watched as Zola reached out, took the man's hands, and pressed a small plastic card into his palm. Daiki stood up so fast his chair hit the window. He had given her that money to change her life. He had given it to her to see if she was as greedy as the rest. Instead, she was handing the power of a kingdom to a man who looked like he hadn't eaten in days. Why? Daiki asked the monitor. Why would you throw away $1 billion on a stranger? He went back to the logs for the other 3 cards. Soojin had already spent $200 million on a rare art collection to impress his board members. Ayaka had transferred her funds into a secret offshore account to start her own company. Hanae had bought a fleet of armored cars. They were all building walls and weapons. They were all acting exactly how Daiki expected them to act. But Zola was different. She was the glitch in his perfect, cynical world. She was planting seeds in the mud while the others were building golden cages. Daiki sat back down, his hands shaking slightly. He realized he didn't want to watch the others anymore. He moved the mouse and zoomed in on the girl in the ring. For the first time in his life, the Mafia king of the tech world wasn't looking for a profit. He was looking for hope. Daiki walked through the gold-plated halls of the Arashiro building, but he felt like he was walking through a graveyard. Everything around him was perfect, expensive, and completely dead. The floors were polished so brightly that he could see his own tired face in the marble. To the rest of the world, he was a king. To himself, he felt like a prisoner in a cage made of glass and cold hard cash. His office was silent until the door clicked open. Soojin Park walked in, her heels clicking like a ticking clock. She didn't look at Daiki. She looked at the reflection of her own perfect hair in a silver mirror on the wall. She was beautiful in a way that felt sharp, like a diamond that could cut you if you stood too close. The guest list for the engagement party is finished, Daiki, she said. Her voice had no warmth. It sounded like she was reading a grocery list. I removed your old school friends. They don't have enough social standing for a merger of this size. It wouldn't look good for the cameras. Daiki looked at her, searching for even a tiny spark of kindness. They are my friends, Soojin. Does everything have to be about how it looks to the public? Soojin stopped fixing her hair and gave him a look that was as cold as ice. In this world, how things look is all that matters. Don't be childish. This is a business deal, not a fairy tale. She left as quickly as she had arrived, leaving behind a cloud of expensive perfume that made it hard for Daiki to breathe. He needed to get out. He grabbed his coat and headed to the Arashiro Executive Club, a private place where only the most powerful people in Tokyo were allowed to enter. Inside the club, the air was filled with the smell of cigars and the sound of men bragging about their bank accounts. Everyone wore a mask of porcelain, smiles that were fake, eyes that were always calculating, and laughter that felt forced. Daiki sat at a corner table, feeling more alone than ever in the middle of the crowd. Then he saw her. Zola Mensah moved between the tables with a tray of drinks. She wasn't part of their world, and it showed in the best way possible. While the socialites were busy trying to look important, Zola was busy being human. She stopped at a table where an elderly waiter had dropped a glass. Instead of looking annoyed, she knelt down and helped him clean it up, whispering something that made the old man chuckle. When she finally walked over to Daiki's table, she didn't give him the practiced, empty smile he was used to. Her smile was wide and genuine. It reached her eyes, making them shine with a light that Daiki hadn't seen in years. "Good evening, Mr. Arashiro," she said. Her voice was like a warm breeze in a frozen room. "You look like you've had a very long day. Would you like some tea, or perhaps something stronger?" Daiki stared at her, mesmerized. For a moment, the heavy weight on his chest felt a little lighter. She didn't want his money or his power. She was just being kind. "Tea would be perfect, Zola," he replied. As she walked away, Daiki realized that in a room full of expensive porcelain, she was the only thing that was real. The morning sun hit the glass towers of Tokyo, but inside Daiki's private office, the air felt heavy and cold. On his desk sat 4 sleek, black credit cards. Each one looked like a piece of polished midnight. These were not normal cards. They had no spending limit. They were keys to a kingdom, and Daiki was about to hand them over to see who would try to unlock his heart and who would only try to rob his vault. One by one, the women were called into the room. Soojin walked in first, her chin held high as if she already owned the building. Then came Ayaka, checking her watch as if her time was more valuable than gold. Hanae followed, her eyes scanning the room for any weakness she could use. Finally, Miyuki entered, her face as still and unreadable as a stone wall. Daiki stood behind his desk, his hands clasped behind his back. "I am giving each of you an investment fund," he said, his voice flat and professional. $1 billion has been placed on each of these cards. You have 5 days to spend it. There are no rules. There are no limits. Show me what you value most. Soojin's eyes lit up with a hunger that made Daiki's stomach turn. She grabbed her card before he could even finish his sentence. Ayaka and Hanae followed quickly, their faces breaking into wide, greedy smiles. They didn't ask why. They didn't say thank you. They only saw the power that was now sitting in their purses. To them, this wasn't a test. It was a victory. After the 3 elite women left to begin their spending sprees, Daiki stayed in the silence of his office. He picked up the 5th card, the one he had set aside for Zola. He didn't call her to his office. Instead, he waited until the club was busy and slipped it into her apron pocket as she passed by with a tray of tea. "This is for you," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the clinking of glasses. "An investment in your future. Use it well." Zola stopped mid-step. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the black card. Her eyes went wide as she saw the Arashiro family crest stamped in gold on the corner. She didn't smile like the others. Instead, the color drained from her face. Her hands began to shake so hard that the tea on her tray spilled onto the carpet. "Mr. Arashiro," she gasped, her voice trembling. "What is this? I don't understand. Is this a mistake?" "It is an opportunity, Zola," Daiki replied, watching her closely. But Zola wasn't celebrating. She looked around the room, her eyes darting toward the security cameras in the corners. Tears began to well up in her eyes. $8 billion? Sir, I am just a waitress. If the bank sees this, they will think I stole it. I'll go to prison." She tried to hand the card back to him, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. She didn't see a fortune, she saw a trap. She thought she was being framed for a crime she didn't commit. "Please, take it back," she begged. "I don't want trouble. I just want to work." Daiki gently pushed her hand away. "Keep it, Zola. Just for 5 days. See what you can do with it." As she walked away, clutching the card to her chest like it was a ticking bomb, Daiki felt a strange tug in his heart. The others saw the money and saw a weapon. Zola saw the money and saw a threat to her peace. The test had only just begun, but the results were already starting to haunt him. The city of Tokyo never sleeps, but over the next few days, it seemed to move even faster. Daiki sat in his command center, a room filled with glowing blue screens that tracked every cent spent on the black cards. He didn't have to wait long for the numbers to start moving. The 3 elite women didn't spend their money on bread or clothes. They spent it like they were preparing for a war. First, The screen flashed with Ayaka's name. She was his marketing director, and she moved with the speed of a shark. Within hours, she had spent $300 million. She wasn't buying jewelry. She was buying every share of a rival tech company that had been competing with Daiki for years. She called a secret meeting with their board of directors and forced them to fire their CEO. Daiki watched the live data, seeing her face on a news clip as she walked out of the rival building. She looked proud, like a hunter standing over a fallen prize. She wasn't trying to help his company. She was building her own throne using his bricks. Then, the alerts for Hanae and Miyuki began to overlap. Hanae, his childhood rival, spent her first $100 million on donations to powerful politicians. She bought their time, their votes, and their loyalty. She wanted to make sure that no matter what happened in the future, the law would always be on her side. Meanwhile, Miyuki, the legal advisor, was busy buying up land in the heart of the city. She kicked out small business owners to make room for giant luxury towers. Daiki watched the screens, his heart feeling heavier with every new alert. He saw Soojin's name pop up next. She had spent a fortune on a private island and a fleet of gold-plated cars just to show the world she was the most powerful woman in Japan. Is this all there is? Daiki asked in the empty room. His voice sounded tired and old. He had seen this his whole life. To these women, $1 billion was just a bigger hammer to hit people with. They didn't see the faces of the families Ayaka put out of work or the small shops Miyuki destroyed. They only saw the merger and the power. They were exactly like his father, and they were exactly like the person he was afraid he had become. He leaned back in his leather chair, closing his eyes. The constant ping of the transaction alerts sounded like a heart monitor for a dying world. Every time a card swiped, a piece of his hope for a better life disappeared. He was surrounded by beauty and brilliance, but it was all as cold as the marble floors beneath his feet. They don't even see the money anymore, he whispered. They only see the win. He was about to turn off the monitors and give up on the experiment. He felt foolish for thinking anyone would be different. But then, he noticed a small light blinking at the bottom of the screen. It was the fifth card, the one he had given to the girl who was afraid of it. Unlike the others, her card hadn't moved for 2 days. But now, it is finally being used. Daiki sat up straight, his eyes fixed on the map. Zola was moving, but she wasn't headed toward the bank or the luxury district. She was heading toward the part of the city where the lights were dim and the streets were narrow. The blinking dot on the map stopped at the city's central hospital. Daiki leaned in, his eyes fixed on the screen. He expected Zola to be at a jewelry store or a high-end car dealer, but the hospital was a place of pain, not a place for spending $1 billion. He accessed the hospital's private payment system and saw a transaction that made him catch his breath. Zola hadn't checked herself into a luxury suite. Instead, she had paid the full balance for a young boy's heart surgery. The bill was massive, the kind of debt that destroys a family for life. Within minutes, she moved to the next desk and cleared the accounts of 10 more families who were about to be sent home because they couldn't afford their medicine. She didn't leave her name. She didn't ask for a receipt. She just swiped the black card and walked back out into the rain. She's giving it away, Daiki whispered, his voice filled with wonder. She isn't buying anything for herself. The surveillance followed her as she caught a bus to the edge of the city. She ended up at an old, abandoned warehouse. Daiki watched as she met with a group of builders. By the end of the hour, she had purchased the entire building and paid for a year's worth of food and supplies. She wasn't building a luxury tower like Miyuki or a secret office like Ayaka. She was building a massive kitchen to feed the hungry and a shelter for those with nowhere else to go. Later that evening, the audio from a small camera near the shelter picked up her voice. She was sitting on a wooden bench, talking to an elderly woman who was crying with relief. The woman thanked her, calling her an angel, but Zola just shook her head and held the woman's hands. "Don't thank me," Zola said softly. Her voice was steady and full of a strange wisdom. "I'm just a person holding a tool. My grandmother used to tell me that money is like water. It stinks when it sits still in a big tank, getting old and cold. But it gives life to everything it touches when it flows. It was never meant to stay in one place." Daiki sat in his dark office, the words echoing in his mind. He looked at his own reflection in the glass. He had spent his whole life building a giant tank to hold his wealth. He had protected it, guarded it, and watched it grow, but he had never felt the life Zola was talking about. He looked at the other screens. Soojin was at a party, showing off a diamond that cost more than the hospital surgery Zola had just funded. For the first time, Daiki felt a deep sense of shame. He was the richest man in the city, but at that moment, he felt like the poorest. He realized that the other women were just like him. They were collectors of stinking water. But Zola was a river. She was changing the world one person at a time, and she didn't even care if he was watching. He reached out and touched the screen where Zola's face was visible. "You're the only one who actually knows how to be a billionaire," he murmured. While Daiki sat in his office feeling a new sense of hope, a storm was brewing in another part of the building. Soojin Park was not a woman who liked to lose. She had spent the last 3 days buying the most expensive jewelry in Tokyo, but she noticed that Daiki was not looking at her photos on social media. He wasn't even answering her calls. She walked into the high-tech security room where the bank logs were kept. She used her family's power to force the young clerk to show her the screens. Her eyes turned sharp and mean as she saw the 5 cards. She saw her own name, and she saw the names of the other rich women. But her breath caught when she saw the 5th name, Zola Mensah. "A waitress," Soojin hissed, her face twisting in anger. "He gave $1 billion to a girl who cleans up spilled tea?" She watched the screen as the map showed Zola's location at the community shelter. Soojin didn't see the kindness or the lives being saved. She only saw a threat. To Soojin, if Zola won this test, it meant Soojin would lose her chance to become the most powerful woman in Japan. She couldn't let a nobody take her place at Daiki's side. She pulled out her phone and called a secret meeting in the executive boardroom. She didn't invite Daiki. Instead, she called in the board of directors, men who only cared about profits and their own reputations. "We have a problem," Soojin said as she walked to the head of the table. She threw a folder onto the polished wood. Inside were photos of Zola handing out money at the hospital and the shelter. "Daiki Arashiro has lost his mind. He is handing over our future merger funds to a common thief." The men around the table looked shocked. Soojin leaned in, her voice sounding like a snake. "She didn't earn this money. She is using a glitch in the banking system to steal from the Arashiro family. If the public finds out that our future CEO is letting a waitress throw away $1 billion on homeless people, our stock price will drop to 0. The board members began to whisper in fear. They didn't care about the truth. They only cared about their bank accounts. "What do we do?" one man asked. Soojin smiled, but it was a cold, scary smile. "We trap her. We report the card as stolen. Before the 5 days are up, we will have the police arrest her for financial fraud. We will make it look like she tricked Daiki. By the time he realizes what happened, she will be behind bars, and the test will be over." She looked out the boardroom window toward the dark streets where Zola was working. Soojin felt powerful again. She didn't care that Zola was helping people. She only wanted to protect her golden cage. She began to write a fake report, a trap that would snap shut on Zola the moment she tried to use the card again. The porcelain world was fighting back, and it was aiming right at the only person who had a heart. The grand ballroom of the Arashiro Tower was filled with the smell of expensive flowers and the sound of a private orchestra. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen rain. Daiki stood at the front of the room on a small stage. He looked calm, but his eyes were sharper than ever. He had invited the board of directors, the press, and the 4 women for the final night of his experiment. Soojin walked in wearing a dress covered in real gold. She looked at the other guests with a proud smile, sure that her report against Zola would finish the night in her favor. Ayaka and Hanae stood nearby, whispering about the companies they had snatched up. They all held their black cards like trophies. Only Zola was missing from the main floor. She was standing near the back exit, still in her simple coat, looking like she wanted to run away. "Thank you all for coming." Daiki's voice boomed through the speakers. The room went silent. 5 days ago, I gave out $4 billion. Tonight, we see what that money bought us. He signaled to the tech crew. Suddenly, the giant screens behind him flickered to life. The first log appeared. It showed Soojin's name in bright red. The screen filled with photos of her private island, the gold cars, and a receipt for a $5 million diamond. The guests began to mumble. It didn't look like an investment. It looked like a heist. Soojin's smile began to fade as she realized everyone was staring at her greed. Next, the screen showed Ayaka's hostile takeovers and the faces of the workers she had fired to save a few pennies. Then came Haney's political bribes. The porcelain masks of the three women began to crack. They weren't being honored, they were being exposed. They looked small and selfish under the bright lights of the ballroom. "This is not an investment," Daiki said, his voice cold. "This is just hunger. You took the water and tried to turn it into ice so you could keep it for yourselves." Finally, the screen changed one last time. It showed the community center, the hospital, and the faces of the children whose lives had been saved. It showed the kitchen that was feeding hundreds of people every night. The room went so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then, Zola's voice filled the speakers, talking about how money should flow like water to give life. The board members looked at the screen, then at Zola, then back at the screen. They had never seen anything like it. Zola had turned $1 billion into hope, while the others had turned it into junk. Soojin stepped forward, her face red with rage. "This is a trick. She stole that card. She's a criminal." But Daiki didn't look at Soojin. He stepped off the stage and walked straight through the crowd. The rich and powerful moved out of his way, as if he were a storm. He stopped right in front of Zola, who was trembling. "You are the only one who didn't fail the test," he said loudly, so everyone could hear. He turned back to the room, his eyes landing on Soojin. The only crime committed here was by those who thought money was more important than people. The silence in the ballroom was so heavy it felt like it might break the glass chandeliers. Everyone was staring at Daiki and Zola. Soojin stepped forward, her expensive gold dress rustling loudly. Her face was no longer pretty. It was twisted with a mean kind of anger that she couldn't hide anymore. "Daiki, stop this nonsense right now," Soojin shouted. "She is a waitress. She belongs in the kitchen, not on our stage. You are embarrassed because she stole from you. End this joke and let the police take her away." Daiki did not look at the police officers standing by the door. He did not look at the angry board members. He kept his eyes on Zola, who was looking at the floor, her hands shaking. He reached out and gently took her hand. It was the first time he had ever touched someone without thinking about a contract or a business deal. Her hand was warm and real. "I am not embarrassed, Soojin," Daiki said. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the room. "I am finally awake." He turned to face the crowd and the flashing cameras of the news reporters. "Tonight, I was supposed to announce a merger. I was supposed to marry Soojin Park to make our companies bigger and richer. But a merger without a heart is just a hollow shell. I have seen what real investment looks like. It looks like a child getting a second chance at life. It looks like a hungry person getting a hot meal." He pulled a small ring box from his pocket, but he didn't look at Soojin. He looked at the cameras. "I am officially breaking my engagement to Soojin Park. The Arashiro family will no longer be joining the Park family. Instead, I am naming Zola Mensah as my most successful investor. She turned $1 billion into a legacy of kindness. That is the only kind of business I want to be in from now on." The room exploded. Reporters started screaming questions. Soojin let out a cry of rage and ripped a string of pearls from her neck, throwing them at Daiki's feet. They scattered across the floor like tiny white teeth. "You will regret this," Soojin's father yelled from the front row. He was a powerful man with a dark look in his eyes. "You have insulted my daughter and my family's name. We will pull every cent of our money out of your banks. We will sue you until you have nothing left. By tomorrow morning, Arashiro Tower will be a tomb. This is not a breakup, Daiki. This is a war." Daiki didn't flinch. He looked at the angry man and then back at Zola. For the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid of losing his money. He had spent his whole life protecting his tank of wealth, but now he was ready to let the water flow, even if it meant a storm was coming. "Let the war begin," Daiki said quietly. "I finally have something worth fighting for." He led Zola toward the exit, ignoring the shouting and the chaos behind them. Outside, the Tokyo rain was falling, but as they stepped into the night, the world didn't feel cold anymore. The night air was thick with the smell of wet pavement as Zola walked quickly toward the community shelter. After the chaos of the gala, she just wanted to be somewhere that felt real. But the streets of Tokyo felt different tonight. The shadows seemed longer, and the sound of a black car following her made the hair on her arms stand up. Suddenly, the car sped up and swerved in front of her, blocking the sidewalk. 4 men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't look like businessmen. They looked like hunters. One of them held a thick envelope in his hand. "Miss Mensah," the lead man said. His voice was like grinding stones. The Park family has a gift for you. Inside this envelope is a first-class ticket back to Ghana and $5 million. All you have to do is disappear. If you stay in Japan, things will get very difficult for you. Mr. Arashiro cannot protect a waitress from a family as powerful as ours. Zola stepped back, her heart drumming against her ribs. She looked at the money, then at the dark, cold eyes of the men. I am not leaving because you are afraid of a girl with a heart, she said, her voice shaking but brave. The money belongs to the people I am helping. I won't let you take their hope away. The man's face twisted into a scowl. He dropped the envelope and stepped closer, raising his hand to grab her arm. You don't understand how the world works, girl. We don't ask twice. Before he could touch her, a pair of bright headlights blinded everyone. A silver sports car roared around the corner and screeched to a halt. The door flew open, and Daiki Arashiro stepped out. He didn't look like a calm CEO anymore. He looked like a man who was ready to burn down the city to save what mattered. Get away from her, Daiki commanded. His voice was low and dangerous. The henchman laughed. Arashiro-sama, your stock price is falling as we speak. Your board of directors is quitting. If you don't let us handle this, you will be a beggar by morning. Is she really worth your entire empire? Daiki walked past them and stood right in front of Zola, shielding her with his body. He didn't even look at the men. He only looked at Zola to make sure she was safe. Take it all, Daiki said to the dark suits. Take the buildings, the banks, and the fancy cars. I spent my whole life being a billionaire, and I was miserable. Tonight, I am just a man protecting the woman he loves. My money was a cage, but Zola showed me how to be free. The men looked at each other, confused. They were used to people fighting for every cent, not giving it away for a person. Daiki reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. I just sent a message to the press. I am giving the rest of my personal fortune to Zola's foundation. Your war has nothing left to strike. I am no longer the CEO. I am a partner in something much bigger. The henchmen realized they had no power left. They got back into their car and drove off into the darkness. Zola looked up at Daiki, tears streaming down her face. You lost everything for me, she whispered. Daiki smiled, and for the first time, his eyes weren't empty. No, Zola. For the first time in my life, I actually have everything. 1 year had passed since the night the world of the Arashiro family changed forever. The cold, silent hallways of the Tokyo penthouse were gone. Instead, the air was filled with the sound of laughter and music that blended the drums of Ghana with the soft flutes of Japan. It was the day of the wedding, but it didn't look like any merger Tokyo had ever seen. The ceremony was held in the very same community garden that Zola had saved with her first $1 billion. There were no golden dresses or stone-faced board members. Instead, the seats were filled with the people Zola and Daiki had helped over the last 12 months, doctors, students, and families who now had homes because of their foundation. Daiki stood at the front, wearing a simple, dark suit. He didn't look like a man carrying the weight of a corporate empire on his back. His face was relaxed, and for the first time, his eyes were full of life. He watched as Zola walked down the grass path. She wore a stunning white dress with bright, colorful African patterns woven into the fabric. She looked like a queen, not because of her bank account, but because of the love she gave to everyone around her. When they stood together, Daiki took both of her hands in his. He realized that losing his title as the Mafia king of business was the best thing that ever happened to him. He was no longer a prisoner in a glass cage. He was a man with a purpose. Together, they had spent the year turning his old wealth into schools, clean water, and hospitals. They weren't just spending money. They were planting seeds for a future they would see grow together. After the vows were spoken, a small reception was held under the stars. Daiki walked over to a small table where a single glass of whiskey sat waiting for him. It was the same brand he used to stare at during his loneliest nights in the penthouse. Back then, he would look at the amber liquid and feel like he was drowning in his own success. He never drank it because he felt he didn't deserve a moment of peace. He picked up the glass and looked at Zola, who was dancing with a group of children from the shelter. She looked over at him and blew a kiss, her genuine smile lighting up the night. Daiki raised the glass toward the sky, a silent thank you to the glitch that had saved his soul. To a life that actually means something, he whispered to himself. He finally took a sip, the warmth spreading through him. It didn't taste like a business deal or a cold contract. It tasted like freedom. He set the empty glass down and walked toward the dance floor to join his wife. The Japanese CEO and the Ghanaian waitress had started a new kind of legacy, one where the only thing that mattered was how much heart you put into the world. Daiki Arashiro was no longer watching his life from a window. He was finally living it.